to this evening's Sustainability Scholarship Awards presentation evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Anna Kikulis. I'm Head of Social Value at Wilmot Dixon Interiors, and I'm also the Programmes Coordinator for the Scholarships Awards Committee, and I'm really delighted to be hosting this evening's session. I'm sure, like me, you're really excited to hear from our exceptional scholars and industry speakers this evening on what I'm sure will be a fascinating evening exploring nature-based solutions to construction. But before we kick off, if I could just have your attention to run through a couple of housekeeping items and also introduce our guest speakers. So you will have noticed a little message come up, which just to let you know that this session is being recorded. And so if I could just ask everyone to turn off their mics and cameras. There will be opportunities to engage. So if you have got questions and want to comment, please feel free to use the chat bar or raise your hand and we'll pick those up as we go along. We'll start this evening with two exciting presentations from this year's scholars, and then after that we will be we'll have some quick fire comments before heading into a round table with our guest speakers. I'm delighted that Marta Godina, Head of ESG Europe Brookfield Asset Management, is our host this evening for the roundtable and will be leading a discussion with our scholars and a handful of industry speakers. We have Charles Law, Sustainability Director at Timber Development UK, Steve McIntyre, Principal Urban Environmental Consultant at A&S Global, Dr. Renuka Thakore, Research Officer at UCM, and Sandy Rees-Jones, Vice President of CIOB, and of course our fantastic scholars, Martha and Megan. I hope you enjoy the evening, and without further ado, I'm going to pass over now to Deborah Pullen, Chair of the Scholarship Awards Committee.
Thanks, Anna. Just a quick hello from me and welcome. Just as a way of introduction before we start on the main event, the Sustainability Scholarships started about 15 years ago, I think, and during that time we've funded 1 or 2 new scholars every year. And really the purpose is to support them through delivering a research project which helps them with their skills in research, and we particularly look for that opportunity with people, but also to create outputs which are of value to their employer, and obviously share that more widely with industry, and over the years there have been such a wide number of topics, particularly in relation to sustainability, from that many other actions have happened. So I suspect, having seen the presentations from 2 speakers, no doubt that the work and the value of their work will go on. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Penny Gala, who will introduce herself and also the first scholar. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Penny Gala, as Debbie said. I'm a chartered structural engineer with around 16 years experience in the industry, but in recent years I've become more and more involved in sustainable design, and in particular circular economy and reuse. I'm currently head of sustainability at Elliott Wood, a structural and civil engineering consultancy, and we're approximately 130 strong at the moment. But this evening I have the pleasure of introducing one of my colleagues from Elliott Wood, Marta Godina. Marta is a structural engineer with a very varied career to date and a wide range of really interesting experience, both within industry and academia. I know Marta is going to explain a bit more about her background during her presentation, so I'll focus here on her journey completing this sustainability scholarship over the past year. So back in late 2020, Marta and I were involved in a research project sponsored by Grosvenor, which considered the reuse of materials from buildings which would otherwise be demolished and recycled. And during this project, we learned a lot about how construction materials are normally dealt with when buildings are demolished. And we're actually quite shocked at how few components and materials are reused. So as structural engineers, our focus for this research was understanding how audits of existing buildings could be used to determine what materials are behind the finishes, and then how these might be assessed for reuse. Marta and I wrote a guide called Full Circle to Reuse, which summarised our recommended methodology. And whilst we covered all the main structural materials in this research, steel, timber, masonry, concrete, we quickly realised there are significant differences between these materials, both with respect to their potential for reuse and the business case for making it actually happen. So the sustainability scholarship offered by the Worshipful Company of Constructors provided Marta with the opportunity to learn more about waste timber in particular, and the potential for reusing that timber. Now, given the reuse of timber is relatively new within the UK construction industry, the areas of exploration were fairly unlimited, to be honest. So one of Marta's biggest challenges throughout this process has been keeping the scope defined, and that's something that I think Marta has managed very well. Marta has worked incredibly hard on this project, and importantly hasn't been afraid to sort of rejig the scope as we've moved through the process. Really keen to ensure that the output is based on quality interview-based research, such that sound conclusions and recommendations can be made from her work. This has actually necessitated a reduction in the number of interviews undertaken compared with the original long list that we put together, which was probably a little bit ambitious in hindsight, but quality has been prioritised throughout. So for Elliott Wood, this research has been incredibly useful. It's opened our eyes to the ways in which timber can be repurposed following demolition or deconstruction of a building that perhaps we will be involved with in the future, and highlighting the type of projects where use of secondhand timber is most likely to be feasible. It's also allowed us to forge stronger links with key industry experts and research leads, which will enable us to continue to build on Marta's work, and most importantly, embed some of the learnings into our live projects. This experience has really reinforced our view that as an industry that desperately needs to change and become more sustainable, talking, sharing knowledge and collaboration are absolutely critical to effecting this change. We cannot have the impact needed without working together, and this scholarship has certainly helped us to make some very useful connections to continue to drive change within the industry. So I don't want to give too much away about the content of Marta's presentation. So with no further ado, please enjoy Marta's presentation, which summarises her research looking at the repurposing of timber within UK construction. We hope you find it interesting. I'm sure you will. Over to you, Marta.
Thank you, Penny. I'll share my screen now, and just please let me know when you can see it.
Yeah, all good to go, Martha.
Okay, great, thank you. So, hi everyone, thank you very much for having me here today. My name is Marta Godina, and I'm a graduate structural engineer at Elliott Wood, and the project I'll be presenting as part of the Sustainability Scholarship 2021 is entitled Strategies for Salvaging and Repurposing Timber Elements from Existing Buildings. So a little bit of my background: I was trained as an architect and also specialized in lightweight roof structures. I then pursued a PhD in structural engineering. And throughout my career, I've been interested in sustainability of the built environment, material efficiency, and the use of natural materials in construction. And together with this, as just mentioned by Penny, one of my main motivations was for me to apply to this scholarship was the research project that we have the opportunity to participate at Elliott Wood, looking into the reuse potential of materials within existing buildings. So I want to start by showing you why the construction industry should care about this. It is responsible for a significant proportion of carbon emissions and energy-related emissions, as well as the generation of large quantities of waste. Issues of the climate emergency and the loss of biodiversity emergency caused by the circularity gap in the construction industry. So what's happening then with the waste wood? Typically, contractors achieve a landfill diversion rate between 95 to 99%, but according to the literature, these are the current waste wood routes. We can see that here that the majority of the waste wood is recycled or downcycled into products of lower value. Most of the timber ends up being used for energy recovery. That is approximately 54%, including the waste wood exported as fuel. About 30% is recycled into wood panels, animal bedding, and other products. Only 1% goes to landfill, and about 16% of the waste wood is unaccounted. We also have some timber that is salvaged and sent to community workshop or is donated, but the percentages are unknown as the reclamation and reuse practice is informal. But the reuse opportunities that sits above recycling in the waste hierarchy or the possibility of upcycling waste wood to create products of higher value are unclear from the literature. And the point that I want to make here is that we are talking about the importance of repurposing, in this case, reusing or upcycling, rather than recycling or downcycling, because this is how we can keep the materials in circulation at their highest value. And this is in line with the principles of the circular economy for the construction sector. So with this context, the aim of the research was set out to investigate the barriers and opportunities of reclaiming structural timber from existing building structures, focusing only on the reclamation of softwood and hardwood for this instance, and repurposing, that is either reusing or upcycling structural timber by keeping or increasing its value as a structural material. This was achieved by a series of interviews, including an interview program to demolition and main contractors, as well as interviews to different stakeholders referred to as elite interviews. So I want to start by the set of barriers identified by the participants for both the reclamation and repurpose. Not surprisingly, for the first set of barriers related to the construction activities, one of the main barriers is the time and therefore the cost that it takes to salvage waste wood carefully. Logistics also increases for reclamation projects by adding activities such as moving materials around to work safely, the challenges with small sized sites, waste wood segregation and storage, the type of demolition or the construction method, and in particular, the skill sets of the operators, which is different for demolition and the construction as well, the safety that this requires, and the uncertainties of not knowing the value of the materials to be salvaged at the outset. One of the principal barriers related to future reuse is the lack of an integrated supply chain that can support the activities between reclamation and reuse or upcycling. On the one hand, this involves extra tasks from demolition contractors, for example, finding a location to store the materials, finding potential buyers, negotiating costs. And in the other hand, since there is an established market to procure secondary timber, if this is obtained directly from demolition contractors, then other issues such as certifications, insurance, or warranties arise. And also the lack of a specification of material reused from the designers. Finally, there are some barriers related to the overall market, including the lack of demand of reclaimed timber, the perception that it is uneconomic, the security of supply to guarantee that the material will be available in time and in the required quantities, the limited market for which the reclaimed timber is considered for reuse, which is mostly limited to the residential sector, the amount of timber that could be reclaimed from building structures, and clients, as very few clients are actually actively asking for material reuse or even circular economy aspirations. Now we could have a look at the salvaging opportunities or strategies identified for timber during the demolition process. This includes the use of pre-demolition audits and other surveys to identify the material that could be salvaged and plan accordingly, and other surveys such as structural surveys to identify the type of joint and whether the condition of the joint is as expected. The early involvement of demolition contractors could be beneficial for this process. Another opportunity is bioreclamation specialists, where they will remove and take the materials from the site. The incorporation of the waste wood assessment guidance. This guidance was released in 2021 and is one of the outcomes of the waste wood classification project. This will help to identify non-hazardous timber members with the potential to be repurposed, and this is especially relevant for structures constructed or altered between 1950 and 2007. And in addition, this could help the segregation of waste wood. If there's enough volume of timber on a project and there's space on a site for a crane, then timbers can be bundled up and moved down and then sent for reclamation. Or if demolition machines or ground bearing machines are going to be used, then the only point where it is possible to salvage material is once the building has been pulled down, where individual timbers are picked from the ground and sorted. And if the construction occurs following the top-down approach, then you can salvage material as you go at every floor by cutting, stacking, bundling and sorting it, and then sending it for reclamation. Finally, putting some of these opportunities together will result in an hybrid approach where machines are employed where they are more useful and hand demolition where more careful maneuvers are required. This type of approach is being adopted by the construction specialists like the Building the Construction Institute in the USA. With respect to the opportunities to repurpose waste wood, we are covering reuse, for example, reusing timber as a timber joist as a timber joist, or upcycling, that is manufacture laminated products of high structural value such as CLT or glulam with secondary timber as feedstock. Unfortunately, the consensus with most of the participants with respect to the opportunities to reuse reclaimed timber as a structural material was that this was not likely unless it was for the residential sector or for the restoration of historical buildings. This was related to the lack of confidence in the material due to the unknown properties and history of the timber members, together with the fact that there aren't any established methods to actually recertify and guarantee the material is fit for purpose. Other reuse opportunities were for floorboards, garden furniture, and furniture like benches, and in general, opportunities for private builders working in the residential sector with homes, extensions, or sheds. On the other hand, the views on the uptake of upcycled secondary timber were more positive as those for direct reuse. But there were three major challenges identified for this. The first one is the understanding of the properties of the reclaimed timber to develop methods for regrading timber for use as feedstock for laminated wood products. So deciding on the scope for the testing program in this case is crucial. The second is the manufacturing process, especially the challenge of removing and identifying nails and screws, as this can cause damage to the tools during the fabrication process. So early involvement of demolition contractors again, and specific instructions to them for their future reuse or upcycle will be very valuable. And the third challenge was that the UK doesn't count with the infrastructure for large production of these products. They are usually manufactured in Europe, and therefore the extra carbon emissions associated with this is an issue. One of the opportunities is to develop an industry here in the UK for waste timber, and this could provide products that are significantly more attractive due to their reduced embodied carbon. To summarize, this flowchart describes the suggested steps to follow to prepare waste wood to reuse or upcycle. It is not intended to be a linear process, especially because some of these steps will change depending on the type of repurposing option. The first stage will be to identify the source. This could be either from a demolition site, which was the main focus of the research, or also from a reclamation yard, such as ash wells for hardwoods, community wood recycling, or the suppliers advertised at SalvoWeb. Once a building with structural timber is to be demolished, we could then follow several steps, including a visual inspection to identify the timber members, a pre-demolition or reclamation audit, and the assessment to identify any hazardous substances in the timber, a feasibility assessment to evaluate the impact of reclamation and repurposing on the program and cost of the construction and future reuse, the repurposing option of either reuse or upcycle, which will help to define the scope of the structural evaluation, that is testing program, and for the reclaimed timbers. We then have the careful deconstruction and the testing program, and the order of these steps could be interchanged depending on whether it is considered to carry out, it is considered suitable to carry out the assessment in situ or after the construction. The test should be carried out by UCAS accredited laboratories providing different services such as visual strength grading and UKCA marking, and ideally this should be contacted well in advance to understand the type of services they can provide. Once the construction and testing are done, then the timbers are cleaned, nailed, resized, stored, and then sorted and grouped to define which timbers are going to be either reused or upcycled. Finally, just before finishing, I would like to outline here a few takeaways or recommendations in future work as well. So incorporate pre-demolition and reclamation audits into your projects. And this is also related to the early involvement of demolition contractors mentioned before. Follow the waste wood assessment guidance. Next is collaborate, and this applies to different aspects. For example, collaboration with manufacturers of timber products, but also other parties or countries with more experience deconstructing and reusing timber, as well as building and sharing our network to facilitate procurement and make this happen, as we don't have an established reuse market yet. Start reusing or upcycling at least small percentage of material to better understand the processes. Pushed for incentives to repurpose and increase legislation. 99% landfill diversion rate is not enough anymore. We need to keep materials for as long as possible at their highest value. Early conversations with stakeholders, clients, designers, and contractors, we all play a key role and could set out like circular economy aspirations from the outset. And as part of the future work, I note here a few items, including the interviews with reclamation yards, timber merchants, and contractors, mostly in the residential sector, pilot studies, investigate the possibility for recertification methods as well, and the life cycle assessment to understand the carbon impact of reusing and upcycling timber at their second life, second, third, or more service lives. So finally, I just want to thank all the interviewees that took their time to share their knowledge and insight on this topic, which provided the basis for this research, as well as my mentors and all the coordinators. And that's all from me. Thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Thanks, Martha. Fantastic. We're going to open it up now for a quick round of questions if anyone has any thoughts. Oh, we've got one here from Alid. What is the main misconception that people have about reclaiming and repurposing structural timber, and how can we overcome this and communicate more effectively?
I think one of the main misconceptions about these concepts is basically that when we talk about reusing something like a waste wood or something, sometimes people believe that recycling is the same as reuse, which is not. By recycling, we are basically kind of downcycling the materials, so creating another product, yes, which will not be waste, which is great, but this new product is going to be of lower structural value. That's why we are kind of focusing as well, or emphasizing the word upcycling. So we can either reuse something for the same purpose, or upcycle to create a new material or new product, but with higher value, structurally speaking. So I think that would be the main misconception. And how can we overcome this and communicate this more effectively? I think just keep mentioning this and disseminating this in presentations, and probably in the playbook. We are going to have a playbook, so have this in mind so that people start thinking about reusing in a different way than recycling, I think.
Yeah, it's a really great point, Martha. And you spoke about educating. Is that an area that you think businesses need a bit more education on, in terms of the difference between what recycling is and what upcycling is? Is that a trend that you're seeing is a need?
I think definitely yes, because we even sometimes, since this is kind of relatively, it's not new, but it's relatively new at this stage where we actually need to take the concepts as they are. So if we are actually want to make a change, we need to be thinking about keeping the materials in circulation at their highest value. And by recycling, just recycling, we are not doing that. So yes, definitely education. It's there's a lot of things that we could be doing there.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any more questions for Martha on what you just said? Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I can.
Go ahead,
Yes.
Martin, and I'm just going to read through this one.
All right.
Yeah,
Just
go
very
on.
quickly, Martha, thank you. Brilliant presentation. Some really good points there. I think I would just like to put in a sort of a cynical client perspective. It was really great to hear you talking there about the supply chain and how, you know, we've got to plan ahead through our demolition projects. But in your research, did you give any thought to how can we can repackage the message to clients so that they'll want to drive this sort of initiative as well?
How to communicate this to the clients, basically. Not really. It wasn't something that I touched as % in the research, but it's definitely something that needs to be done, at least having early conversations. I mean, if we are going to start looking into this, every project that we are going to start doing, then having early conversations with our clients at the outset so that they are aware of the possibilities that we could be looking at in terms of reuse or upcycling, and mentioning this type of difference of the concepts of recycling and reuse, which are different, so that they at least are aware and can make a decision on whether they want to include any circular economy aspirations into their project, but everything from the outset, because otherwise later on there won't be any time to actually incorporate any of these concepts. So
we've got a couple of more reflections here. So I'll just read some of those out before I come over to Sangram. So one from Andrew Hornby here. We used glulam structural beams on Scunthorpe Sports Centre about 15 years ago. What % of glulam is recycled timber, and how could this be improved?
what % of glue?
Yeah, what % of glulam is recycled timber, and is that something that could be used? Is that something that came up for you, Martha, in your study?
Yeah, I don't have the number, to be honest. I'm not sure at the moment which glulam manufacturer is using waste wood as feedstock. So they might be using, I know that, for instance, Buckland Timber, they have done this in the past, but I believe that the main feedstock that they use is new timber. So it will be interesting, yes, to know whether some other manufacturers use actually reclaimed timber, because yeah, this percentage I don't have it. But how can this be improved? One of the main challenges with this was that if we use, for example, reclaimed timber, the manufacturing process gets a little bit tricky, because salvage wood comes with a lot of nails and screws, for example. That was one of the main challenges, because it basically damaged the tools while cutting the glulam or CLT and etc. So identifying that, sometimes the metal detectors don't work, and therefore they end up damaging a blade or something like that. But for this also, conversations or early involvement with demolition contractors could be beneficial, because we can tell them what are the expectations of the future reuse of this material. So instead of burying all the nails or screws into the wood, maybe they will be taking them away or something like that. So they will basically know what are their requirements for its future reuse or its future repurpose. So, but yeah, and I know that some researchers are looking into that, or creating glulam beams, not only with recycled timber or reclaimed timber, but a combination, like an hybrid approach, like new and reclaimed timber. But yeah, that will be something that, if this is done, is really new, I think. So I don't.
Amazing. Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to just come over to Sangram, and then we're going to have to move on to the next presentation. So Sangram, if you could just come off mute.
Hi, I work for Goodwill Industries, and I work towards textile, wood and plastic recycling. but we do have a lot of wood furniture, which has caused several issues. And the metal brackets are also one of the things which we were thinking if we could recycle them or either repurpose them in a way which can be really beneficial. So any advice on that?
Martha, any thoughts on that?
Okay, so you're using it for furniture, I believe?
We actually try to resell it on our sales floor, but after it's not sold, we have to make sure that we dump it into the landfill, and that is not the way we want to go in the future. We want to make sure that we reutilize the wood and the metal in the furniture much more effectively, even the fabric involved. We currently already working towards textile to textile recycling, but wood recycling, finding people in United States has been a challenge.
Oh, okay, in the United States. And actually, I was in contact with the Building the Construction Institute, which is in the USA, and also which they have like plenty of experience. I believe I don't remember how many decades of experience deconstructing and reusing timber, and also I believe the Reuse People of America from the USA. Those two names came to mind. But in terms of what to do, I think it depends a lot of the context. So we need to evaluate the wood to see how can we actually make the most of it, to not just basically send it to landfill.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for
some synergy here, and perhaps you could connect to have a bigger discussion about that. Thank you, Sangram, for that comment. We've got quite a few comments, but unfortunately we're going to have to leave it there because we're pressed for time, but we'll take some of those into the round table. Thank you, Martha, so much. I'm going to pass over now to Leanne Fletcher, who's going to introduce our next speaker, Megan.
Hi. Thanks, Anna. Well done, Marta, for that excellent piece of research. It was really informative. So as Anna said, I'm Leanne Fletcher, and I'm the sustainability lead for the Northern business at Sir Robert McAlpine. And I'm really pleased to be able to introduce Megan's presentation this evening. Megan's worked for Sir Robert McAlpine since I think about 2016, starting as a graduate engineer on a residential development in Manchester. And whilst carrying out that role, Megan also completed a master's in construction management, where her dissertation topic was Planet or Plastic Waste Management on Construction Sites, for which she achieved a distinction, as well as for a master's overall. So it's been evident since Megan started with us that she has a real interest and passion for sustainability, which is great to see. Megan took on extra duties within her role as an engineer, be the sustainability champion for her projects, and also joined the regional sustainability leadership teams, as well as applying for this scholarship. Megan was highly commended at the CIOB Construction Manager of the Year Awards last year for the Rising Star category. So in the summer of 2021, I was looking for someone to take up the role of Sustainability Manager in the Northwestern Yorkshire. And Megan was working as a package manager on a project that was coming to an end. So we offered Megan this position on a secondment basis, which seemed like a win-win for both of us and the business. And luckily, Megan agreed to join my team. So I just want to say Megan's passion for biodiversity and sustainability has really shone through, both in the discussions we've had about the scholarship and regarding a new role. She's encouraged projects to support by supporting them to implement a range of sustainability measures, from reuse of materials and waste management, design considerations through to which bird boxes they should be installing on site. She also managed to get the regional sustainability leadership team out in the rain a few months ago to do some habitat management volunteering for the Yorkshire Wildlife Trust. So anyone on this call who knows me knows I'm not a fan of manual labour, especially in the rain. So that was some feat of persuasion. Megan set in a great example for how those in traditional construction roles can transition into roles where they also consider sustainability and biodiversity. And I hope that we continue to see that across the business from other members of our teams. I'm really looking forward to hearing Megan's presentation this evening, and I'm so pleased that she has this opportunity to present her research and her ideas to the wider industry. So McAlpine are hugely supportive of the outputs from Megan's research and hope to integrate her recommendations wherever possible by working with our clients and consultants, as well as the local community. It's a massively important topic, which I think you'll all agree, and something which must be considered by everyone involved in the built environment sector going forward. So please welcome Megan to the virtual stage to discuss biodiversities. Thank you.
Hi everyone, hopefully you can see my screen.
Yeah, all good to go, Megan.
So hello and thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you especially to the Worshipful Company of Constructors, our mentors and sponsors for allowing us as scholars to pursue research into an area that really interests us, and hopefully this is going to benefit the wider industry. So my interests lie with the natural environment, and for as long as I can remember, I've loved being outdoors, immersed in nature, and those chance encounters with wildlife. And this curiosity for the natural environment and how we interact with it, as Leanne said, led to me gaining a degree in geography before entering the construction industry. I then studied a part-time master's in construction management, got my chartership with the CIOB, and looking for the next challenges when I applied for this scholarship, which enabled me to reignite my interest in nature and somehow find a way to link that with my career. So halfway through this scholarship, I embraced the opportunity to take a secondment into the sustainability department. And it's a very exciting position to be in, as all industries are developing their sustainability strategies. And there's a big focus on carbon, circular economies, and resilience against climate change. So my ambitions and the aim of my scholarship are to highlight the importance of biodiversity and how nature can provide solutions to all of the aforementioned challenges. So my research aim is to inspire the built environment to choose nature-based solutions, starting with the rewilding of Manchester city centre as a case study, aiming to reconnect urban communities with nature and building resilience against the climate emergency. By definition, biodiversity is the number or variety of species within an ecosystem. So for example, we would expect a forest ecosystem to be biodiverse, containing various species of birds, insects, mammals, plants, etc. And we'd also expect these species to be abundant in their numbers. But sadly, this is not the case within the UK. Whilst many see Britain as a land of rolling green hills and lush countryside, the data actually shows that we live in one of the least biodiverse countries in the world, the bottom 10% globally. So the UK is severely nature depleted. In the 1970s, we started to realise that environmental change was occurring, and from this point, accurate records have been kept. So within these 50 years, we know that there has been a 70% decline in British wildlife, and today they're still declining, in fact, faster than ever. And unfortunately, one of the main causes of this loss is due to urban development, building and infrastructure. And many of us listening this evening are part of this industry. So I don't want to focus on this too much, but it's quite straightforward. Construction requires land to build on and resources to build with, such as timber from our woods and forests, as Martha has touched on. And the direct consequences of this are habitat loss and species decline. So let me give you some hard-hitting facts about the state of biodiversity in the UK. We've lost 97% of natural wildflower meadows, over 200,000 miles of hedgerows, which equates to wrapping 8 times around the world. Half of our ancient woodlands have disappeared, and 20% of mammals are facing extinction. In fact, almost 3/4 of hedgehogs have already disappeared, and over 70% of insect species are declining. But if you don't love nature and wildlife like I do, then why should you care? Why should the construction industry care? Well, it's our responsibility to ensure that development is sustainable. And whilst it continues to deplete biodiversity, it's not sustainable. In fact, the impacts are already being felt and are interconnected with some well-established challenges of our generation. Biodiversity loss accelerates climate change. Heat waves and the urban heat island effect are most prevalent in cities. Storms and flooding cause damage to infrastructure and put pressures on the construction industry. Without biodiversity, we can expect deterioration of our health and well-being. If ecosystems break down, the environment becomes polluted. That impacts our air, water, and food sources, our sports and recreation, our rest and relaxation. And the third reason you should care isn't based on science or fact, but something I think everyone can relate to. Whether it's the robin that greets you at the front door every morning, the spider living in the porch that you've grown to love, or the bee that ensures your favourite flower blooms in the garden year upon year. We all deserve nature, and we should all be able to encounter it on our doorsteps. It might be something we take for granted. It might be something future generations never get the chance to appreciate unless we act now. And taking action won't always be a choice if we let things go too far. So looking at policy over the last 3 decades, there has been a clear increase over the last 2 years with an emphasis on nature recovery networks and biodiversity net gain. We now have a British standard and a metric for measuring biodiversity, as well as the legislation of the UK Environment Bill in November. So the construction industry can expect to see a mandate for a minimum 10% increase in biodiversity net gain for all future development. As I said, taking action won't always be a choice. At this point, I just want to pause and reflect though, because it may seem like the built environment and natural environment are two extremes incapable of existing together. And this perception is something I struggled to overcome until I realised that the two are synonymous, one environment, and it is possible to achieve a biodiverse urban environment. In fact, the construction industry holds the solution, and that's green infrastructure. So green infrastructure, by definition, is a network of multifunctional green space, strategically designed to deliver environmental benefits and quality of life for communities and wildlife. This can include parks and gardens, but within the built environment, green infrastructure refers to nature-based solutions to construction systems, such as a green or brown roof, a living wall, or a sustainable urban drainage system. In all of these approaches, nature is used as a building material, providing biodiversity gain rather than a loss. The original aim of my scholarship was to assess the motivations and barriers of green infrastructure and understand how it can be encouraged. Unsurprisingly, I found that cost is a significant drawback, whether perceived or justified, and this wasn't something that I was able to influence. So I changed the goal of my research and chose to focus on something invaluable, something that had gained importance over the last year: connecting people with nature. Now, I apologise for this, but let me take you back to the beginning of the pandemic, the first lockdown. As our civilization was sentenced to their rooms, the roles of the natural and built environment were reversed. Wildlife, once banished to secluded rural pockets, emerged to reclaim urban spaces. When people too were allowed to emerge, more were exploring their local areas with an increased appreciation for nature, and it became apparent that those in cities were at a disadvantage. Sadly, cities have lost majority of their green spaces, and urban communities are in real danger of losing their connection to nature. In the words of Sir David Attenborough, no one will protect what they don't care about, and no one will care about what they have never experienced. So the first step towards building a biodiverse city is to raise awareness of urban wildlife and reconnect Manchester with nature. To achieve this, I began researching existing biodiversity in and around the city. mainly using GIS mapping and databases such as DEFRA's Magic Map. The outlined area on the map represents Greater Manchester, and the red cross is the city centre. Within the boundaries of Greater Manchester, there are 73 local nature reserves, 534 sites of biological importance, a complex network of major river corridors and canal waterways, and evidence of numerous protected species. There are 23 sites of special scientific interest, including the Pennines, precious ancient woodlands, a selection of public parks and private gardens, and the final map depicts wildlife corridors, taking into account all of the above included within the broad definition of green and blue infrastructure. What this map demonstrates perfectly is how cities and urban sprawl is a blocker for wildlife. And this is why we need nature recovery networks in city centres to provide wildlife corridors, but also to allow urban communities that connection with nature. So I then moved on to gather more detailed information on the species of wildlife found in Manchester City using iNaturalist database, which captures real sightings, and also through speaking to ecologists. I was amazed that deer, otters, kingfishers, and peregrine falcon were among the species recorded in Manchester. These sightings made local news headlines and caused a buzz on social media, proving the power of connection to nature. One amusing observation about the deer that I particularly enjoyed was a stag do out of control in Manchester. The third part of my data collection included identifying the location of existing green infrastructure. And at this point, I realised that the existing green infrastructure didn't seem to relate to the local species or connect to a wider nature recovery network. And this really inspired me to pursue my idea to produce a map demonstrating the location of species, green space, and green infrastructure in Manchester. A map that would facilitate the construction industry to build a biodiverse city. So I created My Wild Manchester. The map raises awareness of species in Manchester that need protecting and encourages users to engage by sharing their wildlife sightings, contributing to the map as a live record of species and green development. The intention is for the map to be launched on 2 platforms, the first being social media to encourage interaction and get the urban community engaged with the concept of building a biodiverse city. The other platform involves the support of construction sites across Manchester, and I would challenge all developments within the city to display the map on their hoarding and promote how their site is contributing to Manchester as a biodiverse city. This map is something that can be replicated in any city or community, and while similar initiatives exist, mapping either wildlife or green spaces, this would be the first where green infrastructure and construction is also a key element. And so this is my call to action, to show that the built environment and natural environment can succeed together through building a biodiverse city. Throughout this journey, I've been inspired, not only by discovering species I didn't know existed in Manchester, but also by the number of individuals, organisations and pledges with the same aim. If we design for people and wildlife and choose nature-based solutions such as green infrastructure, we can rewild our cities, reconnecting urban communities with nature and building resilience against the climate emergency. Rebuilding biodiverse cities is an incredible task, and in fact, it's a global issue, but we can start with what's on our doorstep, and I challenge Manchester to lead the way. Thank you.
Brilliant, Megan. Thank you so much. We've got a couple of minutes for quick fire questions. Alice, you've put your hand up if you'd like to come on. Hi.
Okay, I'll put my camera on. Fantastic presentation, Megan. I particularly love the My Wild Manchester map. I'm really interested to hear that you're a geographer as well, because I started my undergrad with geography as well, so interesting to hear. But my question is around, one of the challenges I think we have in construction is if a project's already started or quite far through the design stage, how do you how do you think it's best to ensure that you can kind of build in biodiversity and that into the design once a project's sort of started? Be interested to hear your views on that.
Yeah, so green infrastructure is quite a complex, intelligent design and technology stage of being able to implement biodiversity and get that net gain. But actually, something came up within my Constructors Couch interview with Paul Singh, and we got talking about solitary bees, and especially linking to Manchester, where the bee is the symbol of the city. It gives a really great example of just swapping a normal brick for something called a bee brick can actually gain you that net biodiversity. And the same with swifts as well. Because of the extensive waterway networks in Manchester, a lot of swifts come to Manchester in the summer and they're desperate for a home, because traditionally they would nest in old buildings and nooks and crannies, which new buildings don't have. So just by putting a swift box up and actually doing that little bit more research into the type of bird box that you can put up to get that maximum biodiversity benefit will make a huge difference.
Brilliant, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? I've got one for Megan, but I'll just keep it open for anyone first before jumping in. Alid, what are you most proud of in terms of the difference you've made?
So I haven't actually launched the map yet, but what I'm hoping is that there's all these different organisations in Manchester, and they tend to be the community organisations or the wildlife organisations or the construction companies, and they're all kind of struggling to achieve the same thing, and actually they all hold the answers. So what I'm hoping is this is going to be something that really brings everyone together, and we use this city as a case study to show that actually, you know, construction's not opposing to what these wildlife organisations want, and if we work together we can achieve the same thing. And obviously I live in Manchester, so it's quite close to my heart, and I'm hoping that in a couple of years' time we can actually see the difference, and construction's really engaging with this in the city.
Just on that, Megan, obviously collaboration is so important, and that's something that crops up a lot in social value, and social value is such a big part of companies' agendas now. Is there an opportunity there potentially to do a bit of community work and around this topic?
Yeah, definitely. Again, I think that's something that's, you know, a really easy win that's a lot less scary than the technology involved with the green infrastructure. Because if you imagine you've built a residential block of flats in Manchester and it's just a concrete frame and, you know, the brick facade and that's it, there's the community within that block of flats doesn't really have anything to gather around, and you just get a load of individual people living in apartments. Whereas if you had a green roof or a green garden associated with that needed that kind of maintenance, the community within those flats and that residential block can gather around that green space, and that's always what we see happening. But also just initiatives within the city to really get this going. There's it's called the City of Trees within Manchester, and you know, communities get together around things like that, planting trees. So it definitely links to the circular economy. It links to reusing materials, reducing waste, social value.
Yeah, Sandy's just popped a comment here to say links to education authorities could be a way, and she mentioned that she donated a Swift box to the local primary school, which is quite a nice idea, perhaps getting the local schools engaged to create those bird boxes and things. Another one here from Renuka: have you come across Eddington in Cambridge, and if so, what are your thoughts on it in accordance to your perception of biodiversity? So I'm going to answer this one, and then I'm going to hand over to you, Martin, and we can take some of this into the roundtable debate.
Well, it'll be quick because I haven't come across that, so it'd be interesting to find out about it after this, or maybe it will come up in the roundtable. But
brilliant.
Okay.
Martin, over to yourself.
Brilliant. Okay, then that's a great. On that note, perfect to hand over to the roundtable now. I'm absolutely delighted to be chairing this panel. We've got four stellar speakers, if I could call them that. We have, I'm not going to do introductions in the bios because we just simply don't have time. There's too much to go through. All of the information on our speakers is included in the pack that you would have had in the link. what I'm going to do in a moment, I'm just going to sort of get things going by sort of reading out a bit of a statement. We're going to come to Charlie, then Steve, Renuka, then Sandy. If we could keep our responses to sort of 2 to 3 minutes, it'll give us a chance to get around again, and then we're going to come to the scholars for the final word. And Megan and Martha, you guys need to be ready with 2 or 3 really succinct takeaways to take away from all of that. So you guys know what the questions are beforehand. So anyway, let's get on with this. So in the next 20 minutes or so, we're really going to explore this topic of nature-based solutions, because we've just heard from our 2 scholars here what a big part of the built environment nature could be. So now more than ever, we're all very aware of climate change. Daily, we're seeing its effects being brought to bear on our cities, our infrastructure, our built environment. But isn't it ironic that our modern world is built upon and relies upon the resources that we extract from it? And, I ask the question, how long can we continue to take from nature and to take from the natural world without compensating the immeasurable value that we owe it? It's almost like this last 2 years, it's almost like the planet's saying enough's enough. Go away and think about what you're doing. We must find a way to decouple growth from negative impact, because we are going to continue to grow. Our cities, our urban areas, we're still going to develop. More populations are moving to them. So how do we readdress that balance? And not only do we readdress the environmental balance, surely this is it's a whole societal consideration. We talked there about including the community in some of these projects. I would go beyond that. It's not just about including the community in some of these projects. It's changing the way our entire economy thinks about nature and about its values. So with that, have we got how do we find the right people, the right skills, the right economic frameworks? And as I say, perhaps even we need to find the new values needed to make this happen. So how do we do that? And are more nature-based solutions the answer? As I say, we've just heard from our 2 sustainability scholars. In both presentations, they called for more nature-based solutions to be incorporated into our built environment. And as I say, the 4 speakers we have in the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to try and explore how we can all help to enable more nature-based solutions to address the climate challenge. And as I said, I don't want us just to focus on this as being a pure environmental challenge. We need to think about what our sector needs in terms of the skills, the mindset, and the delivery of innovation to make this happen. So, without further ado, we're going to put Charlie in the spotlight. Charlie, Sustainability Director of Timber Development Limited. Charlie, with your experience of the construction sector, and I dare say a bit of a veteran of the construction sector like myself, you must be really well placed to understand the challenges to driving positive change. But how do you think we can drive more circular and nature-based solutions and low carbon solutions as well across our developments and cities? And I think we're interested in perhaps what the barriers are and how we can overcome them. Charlie, if you're on there, could you come on?
Yep, here, Martin. Thanks for that. Yeah, very much a veteran. I think it's over about 35 years now. So
yeah,
maybe long time. And just like to say thanks to the 2 presenters there. Some 2 great presentations, so really good. I think there's a number of things that we need to overcome. Really, I think just to list the issues for each individual part of the supply chain. I think clients is where it needs to start, and I think you touched on this earlier on, Martin. Clients need to demand those circular and nature-based solutions from the outset. They don't need to know the detail, but it's the most important thing. They just need to say, look, we want circular solutions, we want a nature-based solution, we don't want the status quo. So they don't need to know the detail, just need to ask and portray that desire for it. We've then got to make sure that our designers understand what solutions are available to them. And that's, very much an education piece, and that's not that's from the whole supply chain needs to educate everyone else within that supply chain. So we're not saying designers are the only ones that need educating. The whole supply chain needs educating in these new solutions. And that would include things like, for circular economy, make sure we optimize that resource, including reusing the existing material within the buildings. We touched on pre-demolition audits in the presentation, but where the new materials are needed, which they will be, make sure they're from renewable sources. So timber is obviously a great one, but there's other nature-based solutions there. And ensure that is responsibly sourced. That's a key requisite for that. And make sure that resource is being optimized. Let's not put that resource into single-use pallets or biomass. Let's make sure those trees are used in construction for the long term. Optimize the service life of that product, make sure it lasts as long as possible through some of the modification techniques that are happening. Ensure the products can be accessed for maintenance and repairs, so we're not, they're not getting damaged and staying damaged. And ensure, they're designed for flexibility, deconstruction, disassembly, so they can be taken out and remanufactured and reused. So that's the key areas that we need to look at. And then principal contractors there need to be open to that circular and nature-based solutions and coordinate their implementation within the project. So we need to, as contractors, I used to be a contractor, we need to understand all those systems and bring all the different parts of the supply chain together. And then the supply chain actually has to come up with some of these circular products and services. It's not down just to the designers to come up with the ideas. It's the supply chain know their products, and they need to come up with those circular products and services. And equally important, the new business models that will drive them into the market. As far as the barriers, you touched on the barriers there. I think, we are a very conservative industry, and that means it can take time for those new products to be and systems to be accepted. So that I keep saying it's education of the whole supply chain and on nature-based solutions and circular solutions. Tied in with that, I think we have issues with the insurance market. It's probably one of the biggest barriers for timber products at the moment, and will likely be for circular products. So we need, again, that needs to be, both sides need to be educated. Their broker in what they're, they need to understand the new solutions, but the contractors also need to understand what the risks are to the insurance industry and why they're not insuring those products. And there's been some good work going on. The Timber Accelerator Hub has been trying to bring the insurance and construction industry together, and is doing some great work to overcome some of those barriers. So we need to adopt that for circular solutions as well. But one of the biggest barriers for reuse, and Martha touched on it, on some of that, is how do we reuse those products and the certification of those products from reused materials. So CE marking or UKCA marking, if it ever does come into the new marking system, and EN standards are generally designed for new products manufactured from virgin timber, for example, and it's therefore difficult to transfer those over. So we need to find ways of doing that, and there is a project going on at the moment, and I think we've got Bjorn here from from the CE Bois scheme that's looking to try and develop a European funding bid to try and look into some of those issues. So I think that's enough. I think that's definitely more than my 2 minutes. 3 minutes.
You've given us the answer to life, the universe, and everything there, Charlie. As always, some absolutely fantastic insights in there. I must say, we need to continue the conversation on some of that. I really like the way you brought in the whole value chain, and you said that everybody has a part to play. Clients, designers, and supply chain. So I'm gonna, if I may, Steve, I'm gonna move to you now as part of that supply chain. Steve McIntyre of A&S Global Systems, and I think you provide green infrastructure, and it's it's absolutely great that your work literally provides the spaces and places that are craving this new green fabric. And you must have seen an uptick in demand for more green infrastructure recently. But as Charlie said, and we touched on with Megan, how do we ensure that we're providing the right solutions and not just dare I say green bling? People have this perception that just because it's green, it's good, but we need to go a little bit deeper than that and provide the right solutions out there. So what I'm looking for you to help us with, Steve, is how can we educate and inspire the value chain and to ask the right questions? And actually a little bit deeper than that, have we got a supply chain capable of meeting this new green demand? Steve?
That's very, very good, Martin. Thank you, speakers, for what's come in this evening. It's been very inspiring. I think one of the key things, first of all, we must believe that we can make a difference. We need to commit to the long term and realize that where we are is because we haven't committed to it. As Megan pointed out, the decline since 1970, you take what's happened, we've built now in our urban spaces this concrete jungle, and what we've lacked is soil. Now, soil is key. Soil is part of our ecosystem. Without soil, we wouldn't have any civilization. And I think we need to believe that we can bring back the soil into our cities and towns, and we need to look at ways we can do it sustainably. And we're concerned about global warming, we're concerned about climate change, we're concerned about carbon sequestration, and all these points can actually be taken into account if we start focusing. Now, that focus has to begin with the client, and then to the architect, and then the cost consultants and the property management companies have to buy into it, because any green infrastructure will have a maintenance implication. And that is one of the biggest barriers that we don't realize, that if we're going to reintroduce green infrastructure onto our roofs, onto our perimeters, onto the elevations, there's loads of undeveloped potential in our urban spaces to reintroduce soil. But we can do it without restricting the return of investment. Megan made a good allusion to the environmental bill that went through Parliament in November 21, and it's coming up again this year. It's going to become mandatory, the biodiversity net gain. And a lot of professionals are thinking it's going to restrict my return on investment. But if we believe we can make a difference by adding soil, we can overcome these barriers and actually design systems, going back to your question as to what we can, supply chain that's got systems that work. Well, there's sustainable drainage that can be linked to rain gardens, to bioswales, taking off the surface water, reducing the flooding, rainwater harvesting, directing it through to living walls, blue roofs, capturing the water on the roofs, feeding it back into an intensive biodiverse roof. These principles can all be applied, and there are specialist companies that can deliver, but we need to be educated from the beginning to make that difference.
I really do appreciate that, Steve. You know, I've not actually thought of it that way. I've had a notion that this is an ecosystem, it's a metabolism, it needs to feed one another. But what I really appreciate is one of your you know, this notion about soil. Soil is the key. Bring back soil. If I'm going to take that away with me tonight, I really do thank you for that. Dr. Thakori, going to come to you now. Founder of Global Sustainable Futures Network and a research officer at University College of Estate Management. It's brilliant to see that you're bringing together innovation and research with networks to help deliver solutions and systems. You know, clearly you're at the cutting edge of new thinking and innovation. So what needs to change, and how can we leverage this? How can we change mindsets? Just on mute there, Renuka, if you come off mute. It's usually me.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And thank you for having me here. And congratulations to both the presenters, very brilliant presentations. Yeah, thank you for the question as well. You know, here what I am seeing and what is emerging here, that all the stakeholders need to take their responsibilities. There is a lot of information, but it is not as a part of an education. And these all stakeholders have some sort of responsibility to make the change. Then why it is not happening? Because our systems are fragmented. Each stakeholder or each one is governed by their own governing rules, their own values, and therefore everyone is having a different value, and so the change is not happening in a coherent way. And so we must ask ourselves what we value. How can we value this ecological capital or how we can value the buildings as our material bank? How we can make them a material bank which can be reused, recycled, uplift, whatever the word we use. And we must think that way. Because here, when we talk about clients, they are governed by their own things, like say, for example, they want only the cheapest house probably, but the most comfortable house. whereas developers also might have some different governing rules. And traditionally what I have seen, that the perceptions initially, like many years ago, when we started having houses for everyone and so on, we were governed by economic framing. And then we also followed by our decisions by social framing, that we must afford like everyone should have houses, and which means that again there is a resource use. And then in 70s we got our environmental framing, saying that, oh, we must think about the environment and resource use. But I believe that we must bring everything, cultural, institutional, our this regulatory regime, and all these framings should come within one context, and we should move forward. And
very good.
For the barriers, I think information is a lot out there, but the barriers are or any system which would like to be innovative and change, it actually needs 5 I's, which is like information, innovation, incentives, investment, and initiatives. I think we need to bring all together, not only information or not only investment, but everything should align, and then only a system change can happen. I will stop here.
Thank you. You use my favorite word, align. Everything must be aligned. I absolutely agree with that. And I really loved what you were saying about material banks and changing the values, changing the way we're looking at our assets, and we're looking at what we have as resources that we can use. Thank you for that. Sandy, coming to you now as Vice President of the CIOB. You know, your position is clearly a great place to get a sense of the people and the skills and the motivations that we need across our industry. And you know, clearly we're all facing these global challenges. But you know, do you feel we have the right skills and the right capability as individuals and as a sector, you know, to deliver these net zero, nature-based, socially equitable challenges that that we're looking to address? And I'm going to quote you from last week's Syrian Dixon Scholars. You raised a brilliant quote. You said, you know, if necessity is the mother of invention, then curiosity is the mother of innovation. So I hope you weren't going to use that quote tonight, because I've beat you to it. But what I want to ask, Sandy, we have the necessity in the Sustainable Development Goals. You know, we have the global goals that have been agreed all around the world. But are we curious enough to deliver them? And are we curious enough to find the innovation that we need to find to get the solutions that we're looking for? Sandy.
Are we curious enough? Well, I think we've been given a lot of hope this evening by those 2 presentations, because I think a key to what's going to make a difference is getting the right younger people, and younger people as users, younger people as workers, because it's still fresh to them. It's still fresh to them, and they have, I hope, the curiosity. But I think there's another word that's been touched on already, which is conviction. And I think it's more than conviction. I think it's absolute determination. Because I think, Charles, you talked about having been around a long time. Steve, you've talked about your experience, you know, well, so have I. And I think one of the big problems when we've been in this industry a long time is keeping those arguments we can't believe are still here fresh. It's more than 30 years ago when I listened to a brilliant Swiss engineer talking about how he had designed a community, a model community, that was completely recyclable, upcyclable. From the moment it was constructed to a predicted lifespan where it could be reframed, rebuilt, and everything reused. Now that's 30 years ago at a FIDIC International Conference. It's 31 years ago that I walked through the Pilgrim Way from Kyoto to Tokyo, passing little houses on the hills, all with solar panels, all with carp ponds, all growing their rice. and knowing that those timber houses would be rebuilt, talking about the restructuring. So it's been around a long time. What do we need to make a difference? You've asked if we've got the skills. Well, there's a heck of a lot of people in the industry. I think the CIOB has this great benefit of being a broad church. So we have a whole mix of disciplines. So that partly answers the collaboration issue, which has been raised by several speakers. I think we have this huge problem with fragmentation. I mean, I'm sure everybody in this virtual room has spat nails, to pick up another thing, when you're trying to bring together government departments to make policy stick. But there are ways of doing that. And I think the other missing thing here, if we're going to, what's going to make a difference? Okay, there's so much to talk about. I'm going to try and be really controlled here. We need to find those sweet points that shift perception. Most of the really big changes in relation to sustainability have been driven by the public. And we keep talking about clients. And I think we talk about clients as developers or house builders or the MOD. We're all clients. I spend a lot of time persuading, as an individual client, tradesmen, builders, suppliers, providers to reuse stuff. I hoard stuff. I fished timber out of the Thames and built a sofa. But and I feel strongly about it. Change is driven by the general public, I believe, because that's who politicians listen to, even if it feels a bit iffy at the moment, but we won't go there. But I think that there is an important issue there about individual clients being people. And we talk about community. And I think Megan's piece about going out and re-greening cities, it's the people living there as much as the builders. Then if you convert that pressure and drive, and you have the storytellers, and you were asking me, have we got the people? We heard two brilliant storytellers today. If you have the storytellers that encourage the public to push, then the clients and the deliverers of the construction process have to listen to the people who are going to buy their products. Now that might sound a little bit dewy-eyed and apple pie, but I think it's a multiple driver. It's understanding the importance of knowing how to deal with policy. It's understanding politics with a big P and a small p. It's keeping the arguments fresh, even if you've got sick of hearing yourself say it for 20 years, providing the solutions, some of which have come up, and then bringing all that together so you have the pressure points coming from all over. Young people, and old people for that matter too, but there is a drive from people to say, we can't go on the way we are. Agreed. So we need to plug into that drive.
I must jump in there, Sandy. You really covered that really comprehensively. And the one big thing that I think I took out of that was that, you know, we talked about the client demanding this. I really like the notion in there that we are the clients, the responsibility is ours, and we have to drive this forward. Now, predictably, we've run out of time. Our brilliant panelists overran a little bit, but I think it was worth it to get some of those insights. All of this is captured on videotape, so we're gonna try videotape. I'm old enough to know that. All of this is captured and available up, you know, to be broadcast again. So Megan and Martha, we were very, very quickly. You will have to be literally 2 or 3 words. What are your absolute key takeaways? Martha, literally 1 sentence from you. Megan, 1 sentence from you. What would you want people to take away from this tonight? Martha.
Okay, I will say just the first one. So one takeaway, so just before deconstructing a timber structure, think about whether a piece of timber is actually supporting load, because if it is, it's more likely has the potential to have a second life. And we can therefore...
That's it. Thank you. So we've got to think structural. We've got to use the structural things first. Megan, very quickly, just a few words.
Yeah, I agree with something that Sandy touched upon just there. The client is actually the public, and I definitely think we'd all agree that the public are the key to driving change, and they're starting to really want sustainable buildings, sustainable futures, and yeah, that's
Thank you, Megan. I think what it is as a constructors livery company, it's up to us to reflect what we do back to that public and try and inject, you know, we've got a responsibility to communicate what we do in this area. I think that was a brilliant debate. I'm gonna round that up right now, and I'm not gonna add anything to that. I don't think I could. But Arthur, I think that we asking you to come forward now, Arthur, and just say a few words before we conclude the event tonight. Arthur, are you there?
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Martin. What super presentations they were. The first one, I love working with wood, and the thought of all this lovely wood being put into a landfill was awful. I thought, well, if only I could get my hands on it, I could use it and make something of it. But of course, people like me can't make a difference, the amount of wood I could use. And to see somebody who's just as enthusiastic about wood and about reclaiming it and not throwing this wonderful material away was lovely. And then we went on to the second one. I was born and bred in London quite some time ago. There were a lot more open spaces in those days, mainly thanks to Hitler, I've got to say. My playgrounds were bomb sites. But there was lots of diversity. We had foxes, we had birds, we had all sorts of things. And I was a kid, and they're not there now. So, yeah, things do change. But then we went on to that wonderful panel. The really intelligent, clever people who actually care about these things, as the rest of us do. And it's so reassuring that we have these young people who care enough to put this effort into it, and then the more mature people who are actually in the industry, and they care as well. And I think it's wonderful. It was such a lovely evening from everybody. These things don't happen on their own, though. And our thanks to of course, the presenters and to the panel, but the people who are behind the scenes in all this, the mentors who help the presenters to make their presentations, and Deborah and her committee who found them in the first place, helped them through it, and my thanks are grateful. So thank you all so much.
Thank you, Arthur. Thanks very much for that vote of thanks. Aled Williams from University College of Estates Management. I think we're hearing a few words from you right now, please, if you'd like to come forward.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, perfectly.
Okay, so no, firstly, I just want to thank all the attendees for attending the Sustainability Scholarships. I realise we're nearly out of time, and to the joint sponsors, CIOB and the Worshipful Company of Constructors. So we're really, really grateful for that. I thought we had a really engaging and insightful presentation from Martha and Megan. They were both amazing. If I could see everybody else's picture, I'd clap my hands. I think it's absolutely stellar and amazing. And clearly, our future's in safe hands. In terms of University College of Estate Management, we educate about 4,000 students in 120 countries. So obviously we need to look at these things from a global perspective. And His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, is our patron. And I know he'd be really, really interested because I know he's passionate about sustainability and the built and natural environment. So, our ambition is to be the world's most sustainable university. And we talked about education earlier, but we're all educating the industry's future leaders, and we're contributing to a better built a natural environment. So to sum up, thank you all, and we all need to walk the walk as well as talk the talk. So over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much, Aled. My final act of the evening is to hand over now to Deb. Deb, do you want to conclude the evening, please?
Thank you very much, everybody. And again, just to echo all the thanks around the room, and particularly to the team, and particularly to Anna. I mean, the whole team, actually, we've all got day jobs, and they volunteered to do this as being members of the committee. So, but Anna's is sort of a stalwart in terms of making sure the quality and the quantity go well. I'd also like to add thanks to our sponsors for the scholarship, because UCM, particularly Donna and Renuka, have put such a lot of effort in over the last few years to really enhance the learning experience for our scholars, and they've done it across all scholars, not just the sustainability scholars, and it's really raised the bar, I think, in terms of everything. And CIOB as well, who are continuing to help and give the presenters an opportunity to talk at regional events and dissemination. And, you know, we just hope that going forward for all of our scholarship programs, we continue to all work together and really add value to everything. As Martin said earlier, all the presentations and also the output reports from our scholarships will be available in the next 2 to 3 weeks. So we'll send you links to that. And also that there is a call out at the moment still open for applications for our Surrey and Dixon scholarships, closing date the end of February. So if you or your colleagues or your friends would fit the bill for that, then please have a look on our website and you'll see some information and application form. So without further ado, it's thank you from me and good night.